At 43, James thought he understood the concept of betrayal until he discovered that his wife of 14 years had been living a double life with his best friend for the past 18 months. The revelation would force him to question everything he believed about love, trust, and whether some wounds can heal while the person who caused them remains in your life every day. Love stories don't usually begin with throwaway Reddit accounts, but James's journey into the darkest corners of marital betrayal started exactly there, with an anonymous confession that would expose the elaborate deception his wife Sarah had been maintaining right under his nose for a year and a half. 20 years of shared history seemed like it should count for something, but James was about to learn that time invested in a relationship doesn't create immunity against infidelity. His marriage to Sarah had produced 2 young children, ages 4 and 9, and what he believed was a foundation of trust built on her complete sexual innocence. She had never been with anyone else before him. The messenger of destruction came from an unexpected source, his best friend's wife, who had apparently reached her breaking point with keeping the secret. She forced her husband to confess to James that he had been conducting an affair with Sarah for the past 1.5 years, shattering James's world with the revelation that felt like it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. When James confronted Sarah with this information, her response was immediate and complete. She broke down and confessed everything, answering every question he asked with what appeared to be painful honesty. This transparency, while devastating, gave James a full picture of the betrayal that many betrayed spouses never receive. Sarah's consistent claim throughout their conversations was that she had never considered leaving James, even though his friend had declared his love for her and had contemplated leaving his own wife. This assertion created a complex emotional landscape, where Sarah had conducted an affair while maintaining that James remained her primary choice and commitment.
Have you ever experienced the betrayal where the person claimed they never intended to leave you? Does the intention to stay make infidelity less hurtful or more confusing? James's admission that he can't say he never suspected a thing revealed the subtle ways that affairs often announce themselves to observant partners. He had noticed the increased communication and social activities between Sarah and his friend, but his trust in their relationship had actually made him happy that Sarah had found such a close friendship. Sarah's difficulty in forming friendships had been a concern for James throughout their marriage, so when she developed this close connection with his friend, James interpreted it as a positive development in her social life. This perspective had blinded him to the romantic possibilities that were developing between them. The few moments when suspicion did creep into James's mind were quickly dismissed when he made lighthearted jokes about their relationship and received casual responses that reassured him. These interactions demonstrated how cheating spouses often deflect suspicion through humor and casual dismissal of their partner's legitimate concerns. James's awareness of Sarah's flirtatious nature, combined with his 100% trust that she wouldn't cross important boundaries, created a dangerous combination of recognition and complacency. He saw her behavior but dismissed its potential consequences because of his faith in her character and commitment. The affair's origin story, as James understood it, involved his friend being in a difficult place in his marriage, information that James had been aware of as a concerned friend. This situation had apparently revealed his friend's skill at charming women, something James described as being golden-mouthed, indicating talents that James hadn't previously recognized.
James's interpretation of the affair's development as a lapse of judgment about the ability to control one's emotions on Sarah's part showed his attempt to understand her behavior through a lens of human weakness rather than deliberate betrayal. This perspective suggested either remarkable emotional maturity or potential minimization of her responsibility. When someone you trust completely reveals they've been living a secret life, how do you process the difference between who you thought they were and who they actually are? The mutual seduction that James described, where both parties seduced each other so much that the tension became too much, painted a picture of an affair that developed over time, rather than occurring as a single moment of weakness. The 2 to 3 month timeline from initial flirting to sexual contact indicated a gradual escalation that provided multiple opportunities for either party to stop the progression. James's analysis of what hurt him most about the affair revealed sophisticated emotional understanding and self-awareness. His acknowledgement that the cheating itself wasn't his primary source of pain demonstrated remarkable psychological insight into his own emotional responses. The first major source of James's pain was Sarah's sexual enthusiasm with her affair partner, particularly her willingness to engage in activities she had previously refused with James. This dynamic, where a cheating spouse explores new sexual territories with their affair partner while maintaining restrictions with their spouse, creates a particularly cruel form of betrayal that attacks both relationship exclusivity and sexual self-esteem. Sarah's claim that the affair had unblocked her sexually provided an explanation but not necessarily comfort for James's pain. This revelation suggested that her sexual reluctance with James hadn't been about physical limitations, but about emotional or psychological barriers that her affair partner had somehow overcome.
The jealousy James felt about Sarah's enthusiasm with her affair partner touched on one of the most psychologically damaging aspects of sexual infidelity: the comparison between how the cheating spouse responds to their partner versus their affair partner. This comparison often becomes a source of lasting insecurity and self-doubt for betrayed spouses. The second major source of James's pain was discovering that the affair was ongoing at the time he learned about it. While Sarah and his friend hadn't had penetration sex for several months, Sarah had performed oral sex on him just 1 week before the revelation, indicating that their intimate connection was active and current. How does the timing of discovery affect the emotional impact of infidelity? Is an ongoing affair more devastating than one that ended before discovery? This detail about the recent sexual contact transformed the affair from a past mistake into a current betrayal, making James's discovery feel like he had interrupted an active deception rather than uncovered a historical one. The distinction between different types of sexual contact also revealed how affair partners sometimes create arbitrary boundaries to minimize their sense of betrayal. James's conclusions about Sarah's emotional state during the affair demonstrated his analytical approach to understanding her motivations and feelings. His recognition that Sarah had fallen in love, despite her difficulty in identifying romantic feelings, showed his acceptance of the emotional complexity of her infidelity. The realization that it felt good for Sarah to be desired by another man touched on a fundamental human need that can make people vulnerable to affairs, especially in long-term marriages where passion and appreciation might have become routine. This insight showed James's empathy for the psychological rewards that affairs can provide.
James's observation that the affair had been stable for over 18 months and that Sarah seemed prepared to continue indefinitely revealed the extent to which she had integrated the relationship into her life. This wasn't a brief lapse in judgment, but a sustained parallel relationship that had become normalized in her daily experience. The pattern James described, where Sarah would occasionally write to her lover about ending their relationship, followed by tears, reconciliation, and continuation, illustrated the addictive cycle that many affairs create. These periodic, guilt-driven attempts to end the affair, followed by emotional reconciliation, often strengthened the affair bond rather than weakening it. James's assessment that Sarah's primary regret was hurting his feelings rather than having the affair itself revealed a crucial distinction in how she processed her actions. This perspective suggested that Sarah viewed the affair itself as acceptable or understandable, with her main regret being its impact on James rather than the violation of their marriage vows. Is it enough for someone to regret hurting you, or do they need to regret the actions that caused the hurt? What's the difference between feeling bad about consequences and feeling bad about choices? James's admission that he had given Sarah reasons to think he didn't care that much about cheating, highlighted how our casual attitudes and statements about hypothetical situations can be interpreted by our partners as permissions or indifference. Sarah may have misread James's theoretical tolerance for human weakness as practical acceptance of infidelity in their marriage. Despite the devastating betrayal, James's decision to continue the relationship demonstrated the complexity of love and attachment that exists independently of trust and fidelity. His statement that he still loved Sarah and wasn't disgusted by her showed how deep emotional bonds can survive even profound violations.
The positive moments James and Sarah had shared in the month following discovery indicated that their connection hadn't been entirely destroyed by the affair revelation. Their ability to communicate civilly and avoid relationship-ending statements suggested both emotional maturity and genuine commitment to working through their crisis. James' description of his fluctuating emotional state, sometimes forgetting the affair had happened, sometimes being happy for Sarah's experience of love, and other times experiencing intense pain, illustrated the emotional roller coaster that affair recovery typically involves. His remarkably generous perspective that he considered love a gift and was happy that Sarah had experienced something elating demonstrated either extraordinary emotional maturity or potential self-denial about the reality of her betrayal. This attitude suggested James's deep capacity for empathy, even when he was the victim of wrongdoing. The intense emotional pain that periodically overwhelmed James, despite his intellectual understanding and forgiveness, showed how affair recovery involves both conscious processing and unconscious emotional healing that doesn't always align with rational decisions about the relationship's future. Can you genuinely be happy for someone who betrayed you when they experience joy through their betrayal? Is this emotional generosity healthy or a form of self-denial? The disturbing dreams James experienced, where Sarah laughed at his naivety or engaged in promiscuous behavior, revealed how affair trauma can manifest in unconscious fears and anxieties that persist even when conscious forgiveness has been granted. These dreams represented his psyche's attempt to process fears about Sarah's character and his own vulnerability. James's specific request not to receive psychoanalysis or name-calling toward Sarah demonstrated his protective instincts toward their relationship and his recognition that healing required avoiding additional negativity. His statement that "we're human, things happen," showed his philosophical approach to accepting human fallibility.
The practical aspects of James's situation, his ability to divorce Sarah, keep the children and house, and move forward independently, created a context where his choice to stay was genuinely voluntary rather than economically or practically forced. This freedom made his decision to work on the marriage more meaningful. James's concern that his ongoing pain was bringing Sarah down and might become too much for her revealed the secondary trauma that affair recovery can create. The betrayed spouse's healing process can become a burden for the cheating spouse, potentially threatening the recovery they're both trying to achieve. The irony James recognized, that his natural response to being betrayed might ultimately destroy their chance at reconciliation, illustrated the impossible position that many betrayed spouses find themselves in. They're expected to heal from their trauma while simultaneously protecting their traumatizer from the consequences of witnessing that healing process. When your pain from being betrayed becomes difficult for your betrayer to witness, who is responsible for managing that emotional burden? Should the betrayed spouse suppress their healing process to protect their partner's comfort? James's acknowledgement that Sarah had fucked up very big time while still wanting to preserve their relationship showed his ability to hold both accountability and forgiveness simultaneously. This balanced perspective avoided both minimization of her actions and demonization of her character. The timeline of their relationship, 20 years together, 14 years married, represented a substantial investment that couldn't be easily dismissed despite the affair. This history created both a foundation to build upon and a massive loss to contemplate if the relationship couldn't be salvaged. Sarah's sexual inexperience before James added another layer of complexity to her affair, as it represented not just infidelity, but also her first exploration of sexual variety and novelty. This context didn't excuse her behavior, but provided insight into potential motivations and psychological factors that contributed to her choices.
The involvement of James's best friend created additional trauma beyond typical marital infidelity, as it represented betrayal by two of the most important people in his life simultaneously. The friendship's destruction was collateral damage that compounded the losses James was facing. The discovery method, being told by the affair partner's spouse, rather than discovering evidence himself or receiving a confession, created a particular type of revelation trauma where James learned about the affair from someone who was also a victim of the same betrayal. This created a layer of complex emotions beyond what might often be experienced in infidelity recovery. James's question about whether others had successfully rebuilt happiness after similar betrayals revealed his need for hope and evidence that affair recovery was possible. His search for success stories demonstrated both realistic assessment of his challenges and determination to find a path forward. The practical considerations James faced, children, shared assets, and established life patterns, created both incentives to reconcile and complications that would make separation difficult. These factors influenced his decision-making process beyond just emotional considerations. How do you balance practical considerations, like children and finances, with emotional needs when deciding whether to stay after infidelity? Should practical factors influence decisions about forgiveness and reconciliation? James's recognition that his hurt was potentially becoming destructive to their reconciliation efforts highlighted the cruel irony that the natural consequences of betrayal, pain, sadness, anger, can become obstacles to healing when both partners remain in the relationship. The month-long timeline since discovery provided enough time for initial shock to subside, but not enough for deep emotional healing, creating a period where both partners were still raw and vulnerable while trying to rebuild their connection. James's search for community support and shared experiences revealed his understanding that affair recovery was a process that benefited from connection with others who had faced similar challenges. This approach suggested emotional intelligence about the value of shared experience and mutual support. His specific desire to hear from people who had regained long-term happiness with cheating partner showed his commitment to finding evidence that his chosen path was viable, rather than seeking validation for leaving Sarah. The complexity of James's emotional state, loving Sarah while being devastated by her betrayal, illustrated the difference between love and trust and how these two relationship foundations can exist independently or be rebuilt at different rates. James's story represented the reality that many people face after discovering infidelity, the choice between ending a relationship they still value or attempting to rebuild it with someone who has fundamentally violated their trust. Neither option offered easy answers or guaranteed outcomes. The affair's impact on their sexual relationship, with Sarah becoming more open sexually after her affair experience, created both opportunity for improved intimacy and painful reminders of what she had shared with someone else first. This dynamic would require careful navigation during their recovery process. Is it possible to rebuild a marriage that becomes better after infidelity? Or does the violation of trust create permanent limitations on how good the relationship can become? Can gratitude for positive changes coexist with grief over betrayal? James's mature approach to understanding human weakness and his philosophical acceptance of fallibility provided a foundation for potential forgiveness, but the emotional healing process would require more than intellectual understanding to achieve lasting peace and trust. The story served as a reminder that affair recovery is not just about deciding to forgive, but about the ongoing emotional work required to process trauma while simultaneously rebuilding a relationship with the person who caused that trauma.